Hi everyone, Smoke the Knee Water Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Mount Eerie album, Lost Wisdom, Part 2. This is the latest full-length album from Phil Elverum's own Mount Eerie. Just in case you are unaware, Phil Elverum, in my opinion, is one of the greatest minds to come out of lo-fi, indie, and singer-songwriter music. And now he's dropping a collaborative record with fellow singer and songwriter, formerly of the band Eric's Trip, Julie Doiron. And this is the second time they are crossing over onto an entire full-length album, which should be pretty obvious given that this thing is titled Lost Wisdom Part 2. The original Lost Wisdom actually came out over 10 years at this point. Side note, songwriter Fred Squire was also included in those original Lost Wisdom sessions. He doesn't seem to have carried over onto the sequel record here, which is a change that's worth noting, also one that I'm not too excited to see. Mostly because that first Lost Wisdom record is so important to me. It's such a cute, rustic, heartening, intimate little album that's attached to some of the best songwriting under the Mount Eerie name. And even though I welcome the idea of a sequel, I wonder if the very specific brand of magic to that original record is gonna carry over. Can that be rekindled in such different times under such different circumstances? And maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe Phil and Julie, the two primary voices of Lost Wisdom, all they need to do to justify coming out with another record in this series is just to collaborate on a full length together, once again. But there's not really anything about that original Lost Wisdom record, for as much as I've loved it over the years, that's communicated to me that a sequel was on the way, or that one was even necessary. So because Phil is consciously referencing back to that Lost Wisdom album, I have to assume that there are characteristics and similarities between these records that go beyond their personnel. This must be some kind of spiritual or thematic successor. And if that is the case, I'm not really hearing it. Despite Lost Wisdom 2 only being a handful of minutes longer than the original, the songs on this one aren't nearly as catchy or as straightforward. Even on the shortest track here, Pink Light, which is easily one of the sketchiest and most impressionistic songs of the bunch, to the point where it feels almost unnecessary. And even when Phil and Julie do manage to drum up a good track in the track list here, it feels less like a folk tune and more like a long-winded musical meditation or diary reading. In that respect, Lost Wisdom 2 shares more in common with Mount Eerie's Dawn, or Phil's last major album, Now Only, except not nearly as consistent. While I personally think it's unfair to expect Phil to be writing from the same place that he was in 2008, especially after everything he's been through over the past several years, I also would have never expected him to brand a new album after something he had done in 2008 either, because these two records just show such different qualities in terms of songwriting and ethos. On the original Lost Wisdom, the title track was a song that was essentially trying to juxtapose loneliness, raw emotional pain against all of this sad, uncaring nature imagery, like the world and everything natural in it is just moving on while I'm by my lonely. In respect to the nature imagery, it is a Mount Eerie album, so, you know, there's gonna be like a rock or a tree or two. And curiously enough, there's already been a Lost Wisdom 2 in the Mount Eerie discography, a track of exactly that title on the back end of Phil Elverum's Winds poem, a fantastic foray into black metal that he came out with not too long after Lost Wisdom. And of course, sequel tracks and stuff like that are nothing new for Phil, but just thought it was worth noting, especially since despite the aesthetic change on that Winds poem album, that track feels like more of a true lyrical and melodic successor to the original Lost Wisdom album and track. The closest thing we get to that over here is the track Real Lost Wisdom, which I think there's potential in, doing a track like this, exploring some of the lyrical themes and ideas of the original, losing wisdom, losing something significant as a result of losing a connection with a loved one or someone important to you. Phil then relays that to his connection with his young daughter. The song's biggest takeaways are essentially love intensely while you can, love is worth it, love is worth existing for. Phil also equates love to gazing into a flame or a fire that you just don't avert your eyes from. It's a pretty powerful message, but still forgettable tune, not one of the stronger songs in the track list here, sadly, which is, again, something I miss so much about that first Lost Wisdom album, how tuneful it was. The same messages about love are echoed onto the songs that bookend this album, Belief and Belief Part 2. The latter is a lot better than the former just by virtue of being sweeter, less long-winded. It's a gentle piano ballad performed in a very slow motion with Phil and Julie's vocals intertwining nicely. A genuinely beautiful moment trying to express an undying devotion to love, this message of not losing faith in love. Less enchanting on this album are the songs that engage in not as lofty topics, offering instead plain and frank descriptions of what seem like normal goings-on, with maybe a few poetic embellishments here and there, like on the track When I Walk Out of the Museum, or on the track Enduring the Waves, which Phil kicks off lyrically with the image of him sitting on a train reading about Buddhism and listening to Zaster. As a longtime fan of Phil's work, you might assume that these graphic descriptions of his everyday existence would be exciting, intriguing, or revealing, but for the most part they just feel humdrum and uneventful. I mean, as typical as the idea of love or the loss of love is, it's actually really where the best moments of this album turn up. The song Love Without Possession is certainly a highlight here, with its quaint and simple guitar strumming with Phil and Julie's voices harmonizing in this very awkward but endearing way. It's a pretty linear progression. The instrumentation beefs up a little bit toward the end, and we start getting what sounds like a Velvet Underground style jam. Then the song Widows is a very unlikely single-parent widower anthem. And I'm not trying to use that term in a funny or ironic way, because it's literally the only track here with roaring distorted chords and soaring lo-fi guitar leads, as Phil sings about dealing with the PTSD of losing his wife and just being haunted by memories of his past. Look, overall, I think this album is okay. It's not a bad Mount Eerie record, but I feel like Lost Wisdom 2 is a sequel in name and in name only, because sonically and lyrically, this project has way more in common with Phil's most recent works than it does anything he dropped 10 years ago, even with Julie Doiron in the mix for the entire record. And of course, Phil and Julie collabing again is not a bad thing. They work together really well. But this is far from the best material they've recorded together, and that is only made more obvious with it being a sequel. I'm feeling a light to decent 6 on this one. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Mount Eerie, forever.